The clock had just struck 11:30 p.m. when May finished her exhausting 12-hour shift at City General Hospital. Her feet were killing her, and her stomach had been growling for the past hour. All she could think about was getting something warm to eat before heading home to her tiny apartment. The familiar golden arches of McDonald's glowed like a beacon in the night, drawing her in from the chilly autumn air. It wasn't exactly the healthiest choice, but after dealing with back-to-back emergencies and cranky patients all evening, she figured she deserved a treat. Plus, it was one of the few places still open at this hour in this part of town. As she pushed open the heavy glass door, the smell of French fries and coffee hit her nose. The fluorescent lights inside were almost too bright after the darkness outside, making her blink a few times to adjust. The restaurant was quiet, with just a handful of other late-night customers scattered around. A couple of truck drivers having coffee in one corner, a college student with headphones buried in their laptop, and an older man in worn clothes sitting alone by the window. May joined the short line, pulling out her phone to check her messages. Her mom had texted again, wondering why she was working such late shifts and when she was planning to settle down. At 24, May was the youngest nurse in her unit, and while she loved her job, moments like these, standing alone in a McDonald's close to midnight, made her question her life choices just a little bit. The teenage cashier looked about as tired as May felt, but still managed to give her a small smile. May was just about to order her usual, a quarter-pounder with extra pickles and a large fries, when the door chimed again. The sound wouldn't normally catch her attention, but something about the way it swung open with extra force made her look up from her phone. 3 guys walked in, probably in their late teens, all wearing hoodies despite the warmth inside the restaurant. They were laughing about something, but not in a friendly way. It was the kind of laughter that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Mai had heard that kind of laugh before in the ER, usually from people who were about to cause trouble. They headed straight for the counter, completely ignoring the line. One of them bumped into Mei's shoulder as they passed, not even bothering to apologize. She could smell energy drinks and cigarette smoke on their clothes. The rational part of her brain, the part that had dealt with all sorts of difficult patients, told her to let it go. But she'd been on her feet for 12 hours, hadn't eaten since noon, and something about their entitled attitude just rubbed her the wrong way. "Excuse me," she said, keeping her voice polite but firm, the same tone she used with unruly patience. "There's actually a line here." The restaurant got eerily quiet. The college student looked up from their laptop. The truck drivers stopped mid-conversation. Even the tired cashier seemed to hold their breath. For a moment, nothing happened, just the soft sound of pop music playing through the restaurant's speakers and the quiet hum of the drink machines. The tallest of the 3 turned around slowly, pushing his hood back just enough for May to see his face. He couldn't have been more than 19, with a thin mustache and a small scar above his right eyebrow. His eyes met hers, and in that split second, before anyone said a word, May realized she might have just made a terrible mistake. What happened next would be replayed thousands of times on social media, discussed on news channels, and debated in community meetings. But in that moment, standing in the harsh fluorescent light of a McDonald's at 11:30 p.m., May had no idea she was about to become the center of a story that would change not just her life, but the lives of everyone in that restaurant. The security camera in the corner blinked its red light steadily, recording every second of what was about to unfold. The older man by the window slowly put down his coffee cup, and somewhere in the kitchen a timer went off, its cheerful beeping a stark contrast to the tension building in the air. Just another ordinary evening at McDonald's, until it wasn't. The tall guy with the scar took a step closer to May. His breath smelled like energy drinks and bubble gum, an oddly childish combination that made the situation even more unsettling. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice quiet but sharp. Mei's nursing instincts kicked in automatically. She'd handled aggressive patients before, and the first rule was always to stay calm and keep your voice steady. "I just mentioned there's a line," she repeated, gesturing to the space behind her. "Everyone's waiting their turn." His 2 friends moved to either side of him, creating a half circle that cut May off from the rest of the restaurant. The shorter one on the left pulled out his phone and started recording. That's when May's stomach really started to sink. These days, when people started recording, it usually meant they were looking for trouble they could post online. "Oh, we got a hero here," the one with the phone said, his voice carrying across the now silent restaurant. "Miss Line Monitor trying to teach us some manners." He zoomed in closer with his phone, the camera lens catching the fluorescent lights. The tired cashier behind the counter, who couldn't have been more than 17 himself, cleared his throat. Guys, maybe we could just—" "Shut up," the tall one snapped, not even looking at him. "This isn't about you." His eyes stayed fixed on May, a small smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "So what else you want to teach us, since you're so good at telling people what to do?" May felt her nurse's ID badge pressing against her chest under her jacket. She dealt with drunk patients, people high on drugs, grieving families who lashed out in pain, but this was different. In the hospital, there were security guards, other staff, protocols to follow. Here, she was just a tired woman trying to get some food after a long shift. The third guy, who had been quiet until now, suddenly slapped his hand on the counter, making everyone jump. "Maybe she thinks she's better than us," he said, his voice carrying an edge that made Me's skin crawl. "Look at her, probably got some fancy job, thinks she can just boss people around." The college student with the headphones slowly closed their laptop and started packing up their things, eyes darting between the group and the door. One of the truck drivers stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, but he didn't move any closer. The old man by the window hadn't moved at all, but his eyes were fixed on the scene unfolding before him. "I don't think I'm better than anyone," May said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "I just finished a 12-hour shift at the hospital. I'm tired, hungry, and all I want is to get some food and go home. That's all." For a split second, something flickered across the tall guy's face, surprise, maybe even a hint of uncertainty. But then the one with the phone laughed, and the moment was gone. "Hospital, huh? So you are one of those people who think they're special. Bet you love telling people what to do all day." May felt her patience starting to fray. She was used to being patient, understanding. It was part of her job. But right now, she was off duty, exhausted, and these guys were deliberately trying to create a scene. "Look," she said, taking a small step back, "I'll just leave. You guys can get your food." "Oh no," the tall one said, moving to block her path. "You wanted to teach us about lines and manners. So teach us. We're all ears." His friends snickered, the phone still recording everything. The restaurant's music seemed suddenly too loud, too cheerful for what was happening. Someone's forgotten fries were burning in the kitchen, the smell mixing with the tension in the air. Outside, cars passed by on the street, their headlights sweeping across the windows, illuminating the scene in brief flashes. Me's mind raced through her options. She could try to push past them, but they were blocking her path to both the door and the counter. She could scream, but would that make things worse? Call the police, but her phone was in her pocket, and reaching for it might provoke them. She thought about all the de-escalation training she'd had at the hospital, but those techniques assumed people were willing to listen to reason. The guy with the phone circled around, getting different angles. "This is going to get so many views," he said, grinning. The stuck-up nurse getting taught a lesson about respect. That's when May noticed something that made her blood run cold. The tall one had shifted his weight, his right hand moving toward his pocket. She couldn't see what was in there, but her experience in the ER had taught her to recognize the signs of someone reaching for a weapon. Time seemed to slow down. The burnt smell from the kitchen got stronger. Someone's drink cup fell over at a nearby table, ice cubes scattering across the floor. The old man by the window slowly put both hands on the table, his eyes never leaving the scene. And May realized that what had started as a simple comment about waiting in line was about to turn into something much more dangerous. What happened next would shock everyone in that restaurant, including the three guys who thought they were in control of the situation. Little did they know, they had just made several critical mistakes. First, they hadn't noticed the restaurant's high-quality security cameras. Second, they hadn't realized who the old man by the window really was. And third, most importantly, they had severely underestimated the woman they were trying to intimidate. The next 60 seconds would change all of their lives forever. Everything happened so fast that later, when people watched the security footage, they had to slow it down to understand the sequence of events. The tall guy's hand had just reached into his pocket when May made her decision. Years of handling emergency situations had taught her that sometimes the best defense was the unexpected. she laughed. The sound was so sudden, so out of place in the tension-filled restaurant that everyone froze. Even the guy with the phone lowered it slightly, confusion written across his face. "You know what's funny?" May said, her voice carrying clearly across the restaurant. "I just spent 12 hours helping a teenager about your age. He came in thinking he was tough too. Want to know what happened to him?" The tall guy's hand hesitated at his pocket. "Shut up," he said, but the edge in his voice had dulled slightly. "He was showing off to his friends, just like you're doing now. Ended up with a broken arm and a concussion. His mom cried for hours in the waiting room." May took a small step forward, her eyes locked on the tall guy's. "Is your mom going to cry tonight?" The words hit home. She saw it in the way his shoulders tensed, the slight widening of his eyes. Behind him, the old man by the window had silently stood up, moving with the careful precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. But the third guy, the quiet one, didn't like losing control of the situation. He shoved Mai hard against the counter, sending a stack of trays clattering to the floor. "Think you're smart, huh?" he snarled. "Think you can play mind games?" The phone camera was rolling again, capturing everything. The quiet guy grabbed Mai's nurse's ID badge, yanking it so hard the lanyard cut into her neck. "Let's see who you really are, Miss Hero." That's when everything changed. The old man moved like someone had flipped a switch, covering the distance between the window and the counter in 3 smooth strides. His voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "Son, you're about to make the biggest mistake of your life." The quiet guy spun around, still gripping Mai's ID badge. "Back off, old man, this isn't your—" He never finished the sentence. The old man stood straight backed now, all traces of age and weariness gone from his bearing. Even in his worn clothes, he suddenly had the unmistakable presence of someone used to command. "I've got 3 things to tell you," he said, his voice calm but carrying an authority that made everyone in the restaurant hold their breath. "First, those security cameras." He pointed to the corners of the ceiling. "They're the new HD kind. Got facial recognition built in. Second, this young lady's badge you're holding. That's assault on a healthcare worker, felony in this state. And third," he smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "I spent 20 years training special forces before I retired. Want to guess what I do now?" The guy with the phone had stopped recording, his arm slowly lowering to his side. The tall one's hand had moved away from his pocket. The quiet one still held Mai's badge, but his grip had loosened. "I train police cadets in hand-to-hand combat," the old man continued. "And I'm really, really good at my job." The tension in the air had shifted. Now it was the 3 guys who looked uncertain, who were glancing around for exits. The college student had their phone out, quietly calling 911. One of the truck drivers had moved to block the door. Mai felt her nursing instincts kick in again, but differently this time. She saw past the tough guy acts, past the bravado, and recognized something she'd seen countless times in the ER, scared kids trying to act grown up, making bad decisions that could ruin their lives. "We can handle this 2 ways, she said, keeping her voice professional, the same tone she used with difficult patience. "Either you leave now, give me back my badge, and we all go home. Or we wait for the police, and you try to explain why 3 guys were attacking a nurse after her shift. Your choice." The quiet guy looked at the badge in his hand like he just realized what he was holding. The guy with the phone shifted his weight nervously. The tall one's face worked through a series of emotions: anger, fear, uncertainty. What happened next would be debated on social media for weeks. Some would say it showed everything wrong with today's youth. Others would call it a moment of redemption. The security cameras caught it all. The way the quiet guy slowly placed the badge on the counter, the tall ones whispered, "I'm sorry," that only May heard, the phone guy deleting the video with shaking hands. But it was what May did next that would truly change lives. As the 3 guys backed toward the door, she made a decision that would spark a movement across the city. A decision that proved sometimes the biggest victories don't come from fighting back, but from reaching out. "Wait," she called after them. "I want you to have something." Nobody in that McDonald's, not even the old man who'd helped turn the situation around, could have predicted what she was about to do next. May reached into her scrubs pocket and pulled out 3 business cards. The old man watched with curiosity as she walked toward the 3 guys, who were frozen between fight and flight. Her shoes squeaked slightly on the freshly mopped floor, the sound mixing with the soft hum of the drink machines. "These are cards for the youth center where I volunteer on weekends," she said, holding them out. "They've got free boxing classes, a gym, people who actually want to help." She looked directly at the tall guy. "People who won't judge you for whatever's making you so angry." The quiet guy stared at the card like it might bite him. The one with the phone shifted uncomfortably. But the tall guy, the leader, slowly reached out and took a card. His hand was shaking slightly. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you help us after?" That's when the old man stepped forward, and what he said next would end up being quoted in newspapers across the city. Because sometimes the people who act the toughest are the ones hurting the most. I learned that in 20 years of service. He reached into his worn jacket and pulled out a slightly crumpled piece of paper. "And since we're sharing, this is the address of the Veterans Center where I stay. We've got a program for young people too. Teaches discipline, self-defense, but more importantly, teaches you how to be strong without hurting others." The restaurant had fallen completely silent. Even the kitchen staff had stopped what they were doing to watch. The college student who'd been calling 911 quietly ended their call, sensing that something more important was happening. The tall guy looked down at the card in his hand, then back at May. He started, then stopped, swallowed hard. "My mom's sick. Cancer. I don't know." Angry. At everything. May felt her nurse's training kick in again, but this time it wasn't about handling a threat. It was about healing. "Which hospital?" she asked gently. "City General, 4th floor. Oncology unit," May said, nodding. "I know most of the nurses there. They're good people." She paused, then added, "I work extra shifts there sometimes. Night shift is tough on patients. They get lonely." The quiet guy suddenly spoke up, his voice rough. "My cousin died there. Last year. Cancer too." He looked at his friends, then back at May. We don't usually." "I know," May said simply. And she did know. She'd seen too many people in the ER, seen how pain and fear and helplessness could turn into anger. How sometimes the scariest patients were just scared themselves. The old man, who would later introduce himself as Mr. Chen, moved with the careful grace of someone used to diffusing tensions. "Tell you what," he said, reaching for one of the napkins on the counter. He pulled a pen from his pocket and started writing. "This is my personal number. You boys want to learn how to handle what you're feeling. Call me. No questions asked. No judgment." The guy with the phone had been unusually quiet. Now he spoke up, his voice small. "My dad used to be in the military, before he left us." Mr. Chen's eyes softened. "All the more reason to call. We've got a whole community of vets, people who understand." The restaurant's atmosphere had transformed completely. The tension from earlier had dissolved into something else, something that felt almost like hope. The truck drivers who had been ready to intervene earlier were now nodding in approval. The cashier behind the counter had tears in his eyes. That's when something unexpected happened. The tall guy reached into his pocket, the same pocket that had caused so much concern earlier, and pulled out a wrinkled photograph. He held it out to May with trembling fingers. "That's my mom," he said. "Before she got sick, she's a nurse too. Was a nurse. She always said," his voice cracked. "She always said helping people was the best way to help yourself." The photo showed a woman in scrubs, smiling broadly at the camera, her arm around a younger version of the tall guy. She was wearing the same type of ID badge that May wore now. The quiet guy put his hand on his friend's shoulder. The one with the phone wiped his eyes quickly, trying to hide it. And Mr. Chen stood watching it all with the knowing look of someone who had seen countless tough exteriors crack to reveal the pain underneath. Mai looked at the photo, then at the 3 young men who, just minutes ago, had seemed so threatening. Now she saw them differently, saw past the hoodies and the attitudes to the scared, hurting kids underneath. "Your mom's right," she said softly. "And I think she'd be proud to see you choosing a better path right now." What happened next would be captured by the security cameras and would eventually become part of a much bigger story. But in that moment, in that McDonald's at midnight, it was just about 6 people, a nurse, 3 lost young men, a veteran, and a cashier. discovering that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the most unexpected connections. And it all started because someone decided to offer help instead of hate, understanding instead of judgment. The story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But that night, in that fast food restaurant, something changed. Something that would ripple out into the community in ways nobody could have predicted. The security camera footage went viral 3 days later. Someone in McDonald's corporate office had seen it and couldn't believe what they were watching. It wasn't the confrontation that caught their attention. Sadly, they'd seen plenty of those. It was what happened after, the moment when hatred turned to healing. At first, the video spread slowly through local social media groups. People shared it with comments like, "This is what we need more of," and "Watch until the end. It'll restore your faith in humanity." Then a popular news website picked it up and everything exploded. Mai was walking through the hospital corridor during her shift when her phone started buzzing nonstop. Friends were messaging her links to the video, asking, "Is this you?" Local news stations were calling the hospital trying to reach her. Even her mom, who usually only texted to ask about grandchildren, sent a message full of proud emojis. But Mai wasn't interested in fame. Instead, she was focused on something else entirely. During her break, she walked up to the 4th floor, the oncology unit. She'd been there every day since that night at McDonald's, checking on a particular patient. The tall guy's mom was in room 412. The first time Mai visited, bringing a cup of decent coffee from the cafe downstairs, she found him sleeping in the uncomfortable chair next to his mom's bed, still wearing his hoodie. His mom was awake, running her fingers through his hair like he was still a little boy. "He told me what happened," his mom had whispered to Mai. "About McDonald's. About how instead of pressing charges, she couldn't finish the sentence, tears rolling down her cheeks." The video's popularity had unexpected effects. The youth center where Mai volunteered saw their attendance triple. Young people started showing up asking about the boxing classes, but staying for the counseling sessions and support groups. The quiet guy from that night was now a regular, teaching younger kids how to wrap their hands properly before hitting the punching bags. Mr. Chen's Veterans Center got attention too. News crews came to film segments about their youth program, but they found a bigger story. They discovered that Mr. Chen, despite his own struggles with PTSD and homelessness, had been quietly helping troubled teens for years. The publicity brought donations, volunteers, and most importantly, more young people looking for guidance. The guy who had been filming that night? He deleted the original video of the confrontation, but he started something new. Using the phone skills he previously used to record fights, he began documenting success stories at the youth center. His YouTube channel, Streets to Strength, gained followers who came for the boxing videos but stayed for the honest conversations about mental health, family struggles, and finding better ways to deal with anger. 1 month after the incident, Mai was working another late shift when she got a call from the oncology unit. The tall guy's mom had taken a turn for the worse. When Mai rushed upstairs, she found him in the hallway, pacing, looking lost. But he wasn't alone. The quiet guy and the one with the phone were there too, along with Mr. Chen. They'd formed their own kind of support system. "I don't know how to be strong right now," the tall guy had confessed, his tough exterior completely gone. Mr. Chen put a hand on his shoulder. "Being strong isn't about not feeling pain," he said. "It's about letting others help you carry it." That night changed more than just their lives. The hospital administration took notice of how Mai handled the situation. They asked her to help develop a new training program for staff dealing with troubled youth. She partnered with Mr. Chen, bringing together healthcare workers and veterans to create something unique. Local schools started reaching out. They'd seen the video, but more importantly, they'd seen the change in some of their students who had started attending the youth center. Teachers wanted to know, how did you turn potential violence into healing? How did you see past the anger to the pain underneath? The McDonald's where it all happened became an unexpected community hub. The manager, inspired by what he witnessed, started a program offering job training to youth center participants. The quiet guy was their first hire. Turned out he had a knack for training new employees. His natural intensity transformed into leadership. But perhaps the most powerful change was the one nobody saw coming. Other young people who'd been heading down dangerous paths saw the video and recognized themselves in it. They saw how close those three guys had come to ruining their lives, and how one moment of choosing differently had changed everything. The local police department, which had initially been called that night, took a different approach too. They started working with Mr. Chen's Veteran Center, creating a diversion program for young offenders. Instead of arrests and records that would follow them forever, they offered chances for rehabilitation and growth. 6 weeks after the incident, during another late-night shift at McDonald's, because yes, Mai still stopped there after work sometimes, she walked in to find a surprise. The three guys were there, but not causing trouble. They were sitting with Mr. Chen, talking to a group of younger teens, sharing their story. The guy with the phone was recording, but this time it was different. This time, he was capturing hope instead of hate. As May ordered her usual quarter pounder with extra pickles, she couldn't help but smile. The security camera that had captured everything that night was still blinking its red light in the corner. But now it wasn't watching for trouble, it was witnessing transformation. One small moment of compassion had created ripples that were still spreading, touching lives in ways nobody could have predicted. And it all started because someone chose to see past the surface, to recognize the pain behind the anger, and to offer help instead of judgment. In a world that often seems divided by hate and fear, this one incident in a late-night McDonald's proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon against darkness is a simple act of understanding. 3 months after that night at McDonald's, the youth center's boxing gym was packed. The heavy bags swayed with the rhythm of dozens of teenagers working out their frustrations in productive ways. Among them was the quiet guy, now one of the center's most dedicated volunteer coaches. He moved from person to person, adjusting stances, demonstrating proper form. "Channel it," he kept saying, words he'd learned from Mr. Chen. "Your anger's like a river. You can let it flood everything, or you can direct it somewhere useful." The transformation wasn't just happening in the gym. Down the hall, in a room that used to be storage space, the guy with the phone had set up what he called the story studio. Here, young people learned to use cameras and editing software to tell their own stories. His first documentary, about that night at McDonald's and what followed, had won a local film festival's youth category. The trick, he told his students, is finding the real story, not just what people do, but why they do it. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, remembering how he'd almost posted a video that would have ruined lives instead of changing them. Meanwhile, at City General Hospital, the tall guy was walking through familiar corridors. But this time, he wasn't heading to the oncology unit. His mom had passed away 2 weeks earlier, surrounded by family, including her new extended family from the youth center and veterans group. Instead, he was walking to the hospital's new youth counseling center. After his mom died, he'd surprised everyone by announcing he wanted to become a counselor. "Mom always said I was good at talking to people," he explained to May. "Just took me a while to figure out how to do it the right way." The program he was entering was part of a new initiative created after that night at McDonald's. It paired troubled youth with medical professionals and counselors, helping them understand the impact of violence from both sides. The tall guy's story, from almost assaulting a nurse to training to help others, became a powerful example of change. Mr. Chen had his own transformation to manage. The publicity from the McDonald's incident had brought attention to the Veterans Center, and with it came funding. Now he had proper offices instead of a corner in a shelter and a waiting list of veterans wanting to mentor young people. "You know what the real change is," he told a reporter who came to do a follow-up story. "It's not the new building or the programs. It's watching these kids realize they have power over their own stories. They're not stuck being the person they thought they had to be." The changes rippled out in unexpected ways. The quiet guy's success with the boxing program inspired other gyms to start similar initiatives. The Guy with the Phone's documentary sparked a citywide conversation about youth violence and redemption. Local businesses, seeing the success of McDonald's job training program, started offering their own opportunities. But perhaps the most profound transformation was happening in the everyday moments, like when a new kid would come to the youth center, angry and defensive, and the three guys would share their story. "See that security camera footage?" they'd say, pulling it up on a phone. "That was us 3 months ago. Let us tell you what happened next." Me kept her late-night shifts at the hospital, still stopped at McDonald's sometimes, but now she rarely ate alone. There was usually someone from the youth center or veterans group there, sharing stories, offering support, or just being present for someone who needed it. One night, she walked in to find the three guys in their usual booth, but something was different. They were talking to another group of teenagers, ones who reminded May of how they used to be. Hoodies up, trying to look tough. "You know what's really tough?" she overheard the tall guy saying. "Admitting you're hurting. Asking for help. That's the kind of tough that actually changes things." The transformation wasn't always smooth. There were setbacks, hard days when old habits tried to resurface. The quiet guy still struggled with his temper sometimes. The guy with the phone occasionally caught himself reaching to record conflicts instead of helping resolve them. The tall guy had days when grief over his mom overwhelmed his newfound purpose. But that was part of the story too, the real story, not just the viral video version. Real change isn't a straight line from bad to good. It's a journey of small choices, daily decisions to be better than you were yesterday. Mr. Chen started keeping a journal of transformations, not just the big moments that made the news, but the quiet victories. The first time the quiet guy talked a younger kid down from a fight. The day the guy with the phone deleted his entire collection of fight videos. The morning the tall guy led his first counseling session. People love the dramatic moments, Mr. Chen wrote. The security camera footage, the viral video. But real transformation happens in the spaces between those moments. In the daily choice to face your pain instead of passing it on. In the courage to be vulnerable when everything in you wants to be tough. The McDonald's where it all started became something of a landmark. People would come in late at night, hoping to catch a glimpse of where the famous video was filmed. What they found instead was a community. The three guys were often there, along with Mr. Chen and Mei, ready to share their story with anyone who needed to hear it. "You want to know the real miracle?" Mei would say when people asked about that night. "It's not what happened in those few minutes captured on camera. It's what happened after. It's watching people discover they're strong enough to change their own stories." And that was the true transformation, not just of three angry young men, but of an entire community that learned sometimes the most powerful response to potential violence is understanding. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is offer help to someone who almost hurt you. Sometimes the biggest changes start in the smallest moments, like a late night at McDonald's when someone chose to see past the surface to the pain underneath. 1 year after the incident at McDonald's, the city looked different. Not in the obvious ways. The buildings were the same, the streets still followed their familiar paths. But something had shifted in the way people interacted, how they handled conflict, how they reached out to those in pain. The youth center had expanded to 3 locations across the city. On a busy Tuesday afternoon, the quiet guy stood in front of a group of new members, his voice steady as he shared his story. "A year ago, I thought being strong meant making others afraid of me," he told them. "Now I know real strength is about lifting others up." Behind him, the wall was covered with photos, success stories from the past year. Kids who'd come in angry and left with purpose. Families reunited. Lives redirected. In the center was the famous security camera image from that night at McDonald's, now a symbol of how a moment of potential violence became a movement of change. The guy with the phone had turned his Streets to Strength YouTube channel into something bigger than anyone expected. His documentaries about youth transformation had caught the attention of a major streaming service. Now he was working on a series about similar stories across the country. Every city has its McDonald's moment, he explained to his film crew. Those turning points where someone chooses understanding over anger. We just need to capture them, share them, show people it's possible. At the hospital, Mi's youth intervention program had become a model for other healthcare facilities. She still worked her night shifts in the ER, but now she also trained other nurses in what she called compassionate confrontation, how to see past aggressive behavior to the pain causing it. One night, a teenage girl came into the ER, hostile and combative. Instead of calling security, May recognized the signs she'd seen a year ago. "You know," she told the girl, "I met someone like you once. Want to hear what happened?" The tall guy had finished his first semester of counseling courses. He kept his mom's nurse badge in his wallet, next to his student ID. Sometimes, during tough days of studying or when cases hit too close to home, he'd take it out and remember why he chose this path. His story became part of the hospital's orientation for new staff. "We're not just treating injuries or illnesses," he would tell them. "We're treating people who are hurting in ways that don't show up on medical charts." Mr. Chen's Veterans Center had become a hub for a new kind of community healing. Veterans finding purpose in mentoring youth, young people learning discipline and respect from those who'd served. The center's walls were lined with before and after stories, not just of the 3 guys from McDonald's, but dozens of others who'd found their way there. "You know what the military taught me?" Mr. Chen would say to newcomers. "The strongest unit isn't the one with the toughest soldiers. It's the one where everyone looks out for each other." The McDonald's where everything started had its own transformation. The manager had turned it into more than just a fast food restaurant. After midnight, when the regular crowd thinned out, it became an unofficial community center. Tables filled with people sharing stories, offering support, finding connection. They called it Midnight Mentoring, a place where anyone struggling could find someone who'd been there, someone who understood. The 3 guys were often there, along with Mr. Chen and May, when she wasn't on shift. 1 year to the day after the incident, they held a celebration, not of the viral video or the publicity that followed, but of the quieter victories. The kid who chose counseling over conflict. The parent who found support instead of judgment. The teenager who turned their anger into art. The quiet guy brought some of his boxing students. The guy with the phone premiered a short documentary about the year of change. The tall guy shared news about a grant he'd received to expand the hospital's youth program. Mr. Chen watched it all with quiet pride, his journal of transformations now filled with hundreds of stories. May stood in the same spot where she'd faced down 3 angry young men a year ago. "Sometimes people ask me if I was scared that night," she told the gathered crowd. "The truth is, I was. But I was more scared of what would happen if I didn't try to understand, if I didn't reach out." The security camera that captured the original incident was still there, its red light blinking steadily. But now it watched over a different kind of scene, people connecting, healing, growing. The late-night crowd at McDonald's had changed from potential troublemakers to community builders. "You want to know the real ripple effect?" the tall guy asked during his speech. "It's not just about us 3 changing. It's about everyone who saw our story and realized they had a choice. Everyone who decided to be better, not bitter." The quiet guy nodded. "It's about the kid who came to the boxing gym last week, angry like I used to be. But instead of throwing punches at people, he's learning to fight for something better." The guy with the phone added, "And it's about all the stories we haven't captured yet. All the moments where someone chooses hope over hate, understanding over anger." As the celebration wound down, May looked around at what one moment of compassion had created. The young boxers talking with veterans about discipline. Former troublemakers mentoring kids who reminded them of their younger selves. Community leaders discussing new programs, new ways to reach those who needed help. "You know what's amazing?" Mr. Chen said, standing beside her. "None of this would have happened if you'd chosen fear that night. If you just called the police, pressed charges, let the system handle it." May smiled, watching the 3 guys who'd once threatened her now helping clean up, making sure everyone had enough food, being the leaders they never knew they could be. "Sometimes," she said, "the biggest changes start with the smallest choices. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to see past the surface, to offer understanding instead of judgment." The McDonald's sign still glowed in the night, but now it marked more than just a place to get food. It had become a beacon of hope, a symbol of how one moment of potential violence had transformed into a movement of healing. And somewhere in the city, another security camera was recording another moment of choice, another chance for change, another opportunity for someone to choose understanding over anger, connection over conflict, hope over hate. The ripple effect continued, one story at a time.